Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Game Developers Conference. Will Wright calls our next keynote speaker the Steven Spielberg of games. That helps a lot of people outside our industry place him in their worldview. Yet, I'm not sure it does him justice. Is there any culturally dominant art form or invention on this planet in which a single person played such a primary, direct, and career-inspiring role from its beginning to today? With a quarter century of disruptively contagious hits spanning from Donkey Kong to the Wii, I think we're at the beginning of a new analogy, where future geniuses may someday be lucky enough to be considered the Shigeru Miyamoto of their field. Everyone, it's a privilege and an honor to present a different kind of keynote, a very personal experience with our hero, Shigeru Miyamoto.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for your kind welcome. And thank you for a very good time last night. I'm amazed that it has been 8 years since we've had the chance to talk. And it seems you haven't aged a bit. Just like me. Once again, Bill Toynen from Nintendo of America is here to help me. Thank you, Bill.
よろしくお願いします。I've actually brought along one more helper today. It's the Wii Remote. And with this, I'd like to use the Wii Photo channel to do my presentation. It's quite useful, isn't it? So, I wonder what kind of a garden this is. Where could it be? The correct answer is that it's my garden. So maybe if we zoom in, maybe we can find some Pikmin. Donkey Kong. Of course, in 8 years, many things do change. And I'd like to begin today by talking about just one of those. In fact, let me go back about 25 years, a quarter of a century, to when I first started designing video games. Back then, these were the games that the general public was speaking about. And this was the stereotypical image of video gamers. It's very wholesome, isn't it? This is wholesome too, don't you think? Guys in neckties were playing video games back then. But this photo gives me kind of a sad prediction of the future, I think. So why don't we skip ahead? Now, in 1998, the year before my last GDC keynote, these were the top 5 best-selling games in America. Of course, characters like Mario and Zelda still prevailed. But at the same time, Nintendo also published the best-selling title that year, a true step forward called GoldenEye. And of course, countless people were able to enjoy a very Nintendo multiplayer experience with this game. Still, at this time, people believed that gamers were just having harmless fun. We didn't have a bad image. They were just experiencing the latest and the most popular form of entertainment. But within a few years, something changed. By the time we were well along in our plans for our next console, by 2004, these were the top 5 titles in America. And I noticed something different almost every time that I was interviewed by reporters. Instead of asking me questions about the games themselves, they always wanted to ask me about their perceived effect that games might be having on people. Do we have rights to this photo? Maybe I should, let's cover that face up. Instead, they somehow thought that we were changing gamers into some kind of zombies. And this troubled me. And I think the stereotypical image of what gamers were turned into something more like this. So even as sales went up, our reputation as an industry went down. And it's true, you know, for most of us who are game designers, at this time there seemed to really be only one way forward. The players themselves seem to only want more of the same kind of game. And I think at that time to believe otherwise seemed a little naive. And we as developers even felt threatened that we had to make these types of games in order to sell more. So this was a period when Nintendo and myself personally found ourselves at something of a crossroads. We needed to decide whether we would continue to follow our historic vision. And I had to reflect on my own longtime vision as a developer. Would my style of games still be accepted by future users? Now all of this leads me to my topic today, the essence of any game designer, the creative vision, as well as one more topic, Nintendo's vision. Now, it's important to understand that no matter how clear your own personal vision, it must somehow resonate with the vision of your company. And I've been fortunate because what I believe has almost always matched what Nintendo believes. And I guess there are many ways to describe what we call the Nintendo difference. But in thinking about what Nintendo has always cherished, I've decided to explain the Nintendo difference with 3 elements of our corporate vision. The first you have no doubt heard about. Maybe you've heard a little bit too much about it by now. And that's the expanded audience. Now, a lot of words have been written about this concept, and it's even taken form in our personal corporate mission of trying to market to everyone aged 5 to 95. But today, I'd like to describe what this means by talking about a personal experience of mine. You see, I actually have my own personal way of determining just how successful a product can be with the expanded audience. I don't really know how to put this into English very well. So I'll just call it the wifeometer. So this wifeometer measures only one variable, the interest level of my own wife. Now maybe some of you out there can remember the very first time that you played a game like Pac-Man, or maybe a game like this. And maybe you think that these were very important moments in your lives. They were not important moments for my wife.
テトリスが出ました。
But then Tetris came out.
昨日パジノフさんに会いましたね。
I believe you all saw Mr. Pajanoff on stage last night.
ただね、これでもうちの奥さんは興味示さなかったんですよ。
The problem was that while I thought that my wife would be interested in this game, she was not.
そして、娘がこの時のオカリナを遊
But
びに
then, when my daughter started playing Ocarina of Time at home,
この時少しこう変化があったんですね。
there was a little change.
これです。で今までね全然興味のなかった彼女
See, my wife had gone from complete
が遊んでると
disinterest
ずっと見るようになったんですね。
to a background observer. She watched my daughter playing from behind.
これはちょっと可能性があるかもわからない。
So then I thought, oh, maybe there is hope.
奥さんワイフメーターが振って上がったんです。
The wifeometer moved up just a little bit.
そして動物の森です。
Then came Animal Crossing.
でこのゲームができた時に僕は彼女に
Now, when this game came out,
敵が出てこな
I
いよと
assured
私
my
に
wife that there were no enemies to fight in this game.
で彼女はこう小顎を触ったんです。
So she agreed to actually touch the controller.
で結局娘とこう手紙を
And she
交
became
換した
very
り
happy exchanging letters with our
遊ん
children
でました
and even cutting down trees.
で奥様メーターがグッグッって上がりました。
The wifeometer moved up a little bit more.
もっと上げてやろう。
And I thought, I'm going to get that thing higher.
ご存知の方もいると思い
Now,
ま
as
すけ
some
ど
of you may know,
我が家では犬を飼ってます。
we have a dog in our house.
あ、そうこの間ウィのみんなで投票
Now, my wife loves cats, but I'm a dog lover.
アンケートを
And actually, I think you may know this, but we put a question to this effect out on the Everybody Votes channel recently.
彼女はね猫が好きなんですけど僕と一緒にまあ犬も好きです。で
So,
投票
while
した
she's a
方が
cat lover, she also likes dogs along with me.
はい。なんと
But it seems
犬が
about,
3%、
looks like 63, 64% of the world's Wii owners
猫が
agree with me,
36%。
and only 36% seem to like cats.
なんとガテマラに行くと
And what's interesting is you go down to Latin America, you look at results by country.
ガテマラでは
In Guatemala,
なんと 90% 超えます。
90%, more than 90% of the people there prefer dogs. Do they have cats in Guatemala?
はい。はい出てきましたね。これがうちの犬です。
This is our dog.
6歳のトライカラーのシェル
He's 6 years old. He's a tri-colored Sheltie.
僕より立派なソファに座って
And he sleeps on a better mattress than I do.
こう顔がね
Now, if you look at his face, it looks kind of like a guitar pick.
ピックって言うんです。
So we named him Pick.
で、まあ、この犬を飼って家内というトレーニングをしたん
Now,
ですね。
ever since Pick joined our family, we've been studying dog training.
犬の友達がいっぱいい
And
ま
we've
した
also made new friends through the other dogs that our dog has met.
で新しい楽しみがいっぱい見つかった。
So he's brought us all brand new joys and
ちょっ
discoveries.
と話を元に戻しますね。
So, getting back to my point today,
彼女のレベルアップと結構関係あるんです。
this actually does relate to moving up the
僕は
wifeometer.
その犬を通じて知り合った友達とか、それから犬のトレーニングを
So while I was
すること自体
watching our dog friends and my wife,
それから奥さん、こういうのを全部
I thought that,
ゲームプレイヤーにしたらもの
you know,
すごく
maybe
うまい
if we
人
could
にな
get
る
these
と思います
people and turn them into game players, we could find a way to interest them,
しかも犬のトレーニングにはもう面白い
we could expand the user base.
中には
And at the same time, there I also was noticing several elements to dog training that I thought I would want to turn into a video game.
このゲームを彼に見せたんです
So when I eventually showed this game to my wife,
で妻からは全くこれ新しい視点でゲームを見るよう
she
に変わり
finally
ました
started to look at video games from a completely different perspective.
そしてノートね
And then came Brain Age.
で彼女は結構ゲーマーになったんですね
Now, this is the game that has turned her into a true gamer.
彼女は自分でもできる身近なものとしてゲームを受け取った
Thanks to this game, she's now accepted video games as part of her daily
イ
life.
ンタラクティブの面白さに気がついた
And she's finally begun to understand the unique interactive entertainment found in video games.
張りが上がっていきますね
It's moved up another notch.
そしてもちろん、うちの家には今 Wii があるんですけど、
And then today, of course, we have a Wii in our
先
house.
月の2月の14日は、
So last month, on the 14th, Valentine's Day,
バレンタインデーだね
In Japan on Valentine's Day, women give chocolates to men. It's very nice. So, as usual, I came home rather late from work. I expected her to be asleep, but I opened the door and I heard the sounds of the Wii. So, of course, I thought, oh, she waited up just to give me chocolates. That's so sweet. But actually, she was just casting her votes on the Everybody Votes channel. But here's the amazing thing. What this meant is that she herself used the Wii and downloaded the Everybody Votes channel all on her own. This is an incredible occurrence in my household. Like, it would be more normal for me to walk home and find Donkey Kong eating at my dinner table. So now, things have really changed in my house. This is the second version of Brain Age, released in Japan. Some of you may know this, but it has a Dr. Mario minigame in it. And this is the amazing thing. Now, my wife comes to me, and she tells me I can beat you at this game anytime. She's bragging to me. The thing is, looking at her scores, she's right. She turned into a hardcore gamer much faster than I expected. The wifeometer jumped up dramatically. So there it is. So now she's playing a lot of Wii Sports. And not only that, she invites our friends over, and anytime they're there, she always invites them to play Wii Sports. Plus, I don't know if she'll ever stop making Miis. She's made Miis for our family, for our relatives. She's even making them for everyone in the neighborhood. And then she enjoys showing them to everybody. So, I think this is actually something that's very lucky for me. See, because now she's getting a taste for what it's like to create something. So I see this as her first step towards game design. So I think that together, we'll be competing with our own game designs going forward. And eventually, she's going to come up with a very unique idea. When she does come up with that unique idea, I can retire. So now I'd like to talk about the second key element of Nintendo's vision. And that's our devotion to the entertainment business. We're fortunate. We don't have to worry about business diversification, expanding into other areas. And without needing to allocate our resources to other businesses, every employee is able to focus solely on entertainment. And as a result, our company has a well-struck internal balance. Engineers and software creators both have a deep level of understanding about entertainment. And that makes it more efficient in developing new products. We feel that an environment in which programmers and engineers are always talking is very important for creating truly innovative products. And at Nintendo, these teams, in fact, work together in the very same building. They're not separated by acres or miles or oceans. The chance for collaboration happens all day long, in the office, in the cafeteria, even in the bathroom. Now, for example, I majored in industrial design in college. Because of that, I've been involved in the design of every Nintendo controller on every console since the NES. And I was lucky that many of the people that I worked with in designing these controllers had worked with me previously. A lot of them were from my own department. And we understood each other, and it was lucky, because we were able to work very effectively as a team. But I don't want to say this so that everybody then says, oh, you know, Miyamoto created this controller. Or to think, for that matter, that any one person created any controller. It doesn't work that way at Nintendo. It's a group collaboration. So here's the Wii. Now in creating Wii, this process was more intense than ever. We actually had different teams trying to reconcile their separate viewpoints. For example, one team was focused entirely on trying to create brand new styles of gameplay. Another team, the Zelda team, was concerned most with allowing current gamers to continue to play our historic franchises. And a third group was concerned and focused on making sure that our third-party developers' games would still be able to be played by everybody without difficulty with this new controller. That the overall concept that the Wii team wanted most was a controller that would be simple and accessible for everyone. The engineers, of course, had ideas on how a lot of different technologies could be incorporated. And the software designers were, of course, very enthused because they could create new styles of gameplay. But at the same time, they were also very concerned. They didn't want something that was so different that it could force us to turn our backs on the heritage that we've invested in all of our key franchises. So in the process, we actually fabricated dozens and dozens of different prototypes for the Wii controller, like this one. You haven't seen this before, have you? This is the cheddar cheese. This one, the right half of it rotates, and on the bottom part of it, which you can't see here, there's a whole bunch of buttons, making it look very complicated. Gradually, we got closer to the design you all know now. And what we did was we would take these prototypes, we would touch them, analyze them, we would create test programs for each one, and then the hardware designers would give feedback. And then the process would start all over again. And we asked, what shape should this controller be? What technologies should we use? Which combination of elements would create the most entertainment for the most users? This was really kind of the most exciting period for us because any idea could be suggested, but at the same time, we felt we were in a long tunnel with no light at the end. Finally, we decided that we would mimic the look of a TV remote. But this final version, the one that you use today, is truly the result and the achievement of a very widespread collaboration with members from a number of different teams. So we took these kinds of conversations to an extreme, balancing the needs of software and hardware, while thinking about the ideas for what became the Wii. And at one point, we even wondered, with the recent advances in portable gaming technology, did we even really need a new home console that connects to an immobile TV at all? But these kinds of ongoing collaborations, I think, are something that only platform manufacturers can do. And in fact, I think this is Nintendo's responsibility. When we decided on this form of the Wii Remote, it felt like we had finally moved out of that long tunnel. Can do a lot, can it? As a controller, the Wii Remote does a lot of what I have always dreamed of for many long years. Now, of course, it's important for us to make hardware that is compatible for software that's also designed for other systems. But even more important is the ability of our hardware to provide all game creators with the opportunity to create new kinds of entertainment that could never be realized with other systems. And we're committed to providing this opportunity to all of you, all the game designers around the world. And of course, this is Nintendo's mission, and we're also going to continue to use all of our experience to try to create new and better kinds of entertainment for everyone as well. Now, as you know, Nintendo's definition of technical progress often focuses on new forms of interface for console games. But in fact, we keep the same kind of viewpoint for projects of much wider genres. This is my house. I'm lying. This is actually a museum. It's a place called Shigure-den in Kyoto, which is the same city as Nintendo's headquarters. Shigeru-den. It's not Shigeru-den. Shigure-den. But this place has nothing to do with video games. It's a museum for Hyakunin Isshu, a game that blends playing cards and ancient Japanese poetry. Cards like these. Many companies make these cards, and Nintendo is one of them. I was actually put in charge of producing the attractions for this facility a year or two ago. Now, maybe all of you have a poetry museum in your hometown. But even if you do, I think this one is a little different. You see, verses of classic poems are displayed on 70 45-inch LCD television screens on the floor of the exhibition hall. And when you enter the museum, each visitor gets their own modified form of a Nintendo DS, which you walk around the museum with. And each DS is connected to a host computer, so that it understands and knows your location within the museum. You can press buttons on the DS to change the cards that are appearing on the screen at your feet. There's a little bit of this photo is a little bit dark, but you can see that this is a prototype of the system in development. You can see the smaller TV screens down below. So creating something like this was very fun for our team, working with the engineers. Of course, using this system, you can do a lot of different things. This is an example of the DS that you get there, and what you see in the background is an aerial photo of the city of Kyoto. And you can actually see cars driving on the streets and airplanes flying through the air. So you can actually walk above this aerial view as if you're walking over the city of Kyoto. And of course, you can visit all of Kyoto's hottest tourist attractions. So I have to say that for the members of our team who worked on this, it was enjoyable for a number of reasons. First of all, it was kind of like a large-scale form of entertainment that players themselves actually walk around in. And of course, since it wasn't technically a game, we didn't have to worry about figuring out how the game would end. But I think the most rewarding part of this whole experience was seeing how this bridges the gap between generations. See, these kinds of poems are generally of interest only to the elderly, but by adding the interactive elements and the familiarity of the DS interface, grandchildren and even great-grandchildren are more than happy to come along to this museum with their older family members. So our priority with this project was really to provide young people and people with other interests the opportunity to touch and learn about traditional culture. And to us, this was more important than simply offering more detailed information to those who already had good knowledge of the poems. And so far, it appears that things are going quite well. The facility is attracting the audiences we attended, and we feel that maybe we're expanding an entertainment audience in a new way. So this leads me to the last element of Nintendo's corporate vision that I need to talk about today, and that's risk. Now, since the days when Mr. Yamauchi was our president, we have always encouraged employees to do things differently from everyone else. Now, of course, when you take new challenges, you take a risk. The bigger the challenge, the bigger the risk. So Nintendo prepared itself for that risk, and we took on the challenge of questioning our own definition of what a video game is. A good example of this is the nature of the Nintendo DS and its interface, as well as the wide array of software that appears on it in the form of the Touch Generations titles. Now, some of these games may be good for your soul. Some may be practical, good for your brain. But even when we're making these games, our ultimate goal is to make them fun. But in my experience, none of our risks has ever rivaled the design of the Wii. Now, frankly, GameCube was really just a half step in working towards an expanded audience. It wasn't enough. It was technically advanced, but I wanted it to also appeal to a wider audience. So that's why in the design of the controller, I requested that we make the A button larger and a different color. So that way it would be easy for anybody to pick it up and immediately know how to start playing. But in the end, I still think that this interface was too complicated for people who weren't gamers. So with the Wii, we had to decide. Do we continue to take this risk of trying to attract new gamers? Or do we give up and simply evolve our hardware in the same way that we always have done in the past? But of course, we dared to take the greater risk. But in all honesty, there were concerns, even for me. I mean, after all, for the last 20 years, we've been playing with and even ourselves creating controllers that required you to hold them with two hands. So, we'd gotten too used to that. And now we're just going to free our hands, take it apart. So while development was going on, I found myself acting as kind of an evangelist inside the company. I would meet with our producers, and I would tell them that in the end, you have to think not about what's going to be lost, but think about what's going to be gained. So gradually, as we did this, I managed to give myself confidence. And of course, I spoke with Mr. Iwata about this many times. And the more we talked about it together, the better we both felt. But then when we would separate and go off and do our things, those concerns would return. To be honest, it wasn't until last spring at E3 when we saw the long lines and the happy faces of the people coming out of our booth. Look at this. That was the moment when we knew that this risk was worth taking. We better cover up his face too. Are any of you in these photos? So, corporate vision is, of course, essential. But corporations don't make video games. People do. So let me move from the vision of Nintendo to the vision I have always employed, personally, in my career as a game developer. In interviews, I'm often asked about specific elements in my games. Where did you get the idea for that character or that hardware? Why did you design that level in that way? And sometimes I can tell that the people who are asking these questions have spent a lot of time analyzing my games in very detailed fashion to search for the answers. But the riddle here is that the harder they look at the individual parts of the game itself, the further away they get from determining that answer. The reason for this is that my initial focus and my primary focus throughout development is not these individual elements of the game. When I'm creating a game, what I always try to envision, it's what I always think about, is the core element of fun within the game. And to do that, I imagine one thing, and that's the face of the player while he or she is experiencing the game, not any individual part of the game itself. And what the players will feel will be reflected on their face. And as an entertainer, I want them to be entertained. I was reminded of this recently when we launched the Nintendo DS in Japan and first put the system out in public for people to start playing. We asked some of those people if we could videotape them, and you can see some of these videos the first time they're playing the DS at a website called My First Touch DS. So let's take a look at two cuts that impressed me most. Let's take a quick look. So cute. That guy there is happy because his girlfriends are so excited. And of course, his grandfather is happy that his granddaughter is having so much fun as well. And since it's a stylus, a touch pen, he's able to play the game too. So, as you can see, not only is the person who's playing the game being entertained, but the people standing around watching are getting caught up in the excitement, and they're being entertained as well. And that made me very happy. That's the reaction that I always want. Now, my personal view as a designer is that I always want that reaction, that emotion, to be positive. Surprise, a sense of happiness, a sense of satisfaction, glee. We use a variety of emotions in games. Certain obstacles may temporarily raise feelings of suspense, competition, even frustration. But we insert these elements because they are all in service of producing a new sensation that you may have never experienced before. And to the extent possible, I always want that final result, that final emotion, to be a positive one. That's what I always have in mind in creating my games. But of course, I understand that other designers work with other visions, other emotions, sometimes fear or horror, or revenge, or violence, and that's fine. There is no right or wrong in what feelings are triggered. All that's important is the final result that you want the player to experience. And I think that's up to you, how you do that. All I'm saying is that in my personal case, the feeling that I always strive for is a positive one. And so I keep this picture of the player's face in my mind until the very end of development. And if sometimes I feel our team has lost their way or lost sight of that image, or maybe somehow we're not going to elicit the entertainment that we desire, then I'm willing to take the risk and, as some people like to say, upend the tea table.
私がやってるのはそのゲームデザイナーにとって楽しいもの
But what I'm doing really is just making sure that the game is as fun to play as possible.
で作り手っていうのはねよく同じ間違いをするん
The
です。
thing is that we, as game designers, often repeat the same
これは
mistake.
自分が作ってるものをよく
And that's because we're too familiar. We know too much about the games that we're making.
だからプレイヤーがこれのことをよく知らないということを
We tend to forget that actual gamers will come into it not knowing anything about the games that we've been creating.
自分が作ってるでやっちゃいますそれを。
And oftentimes, that's how we continue to create our games, is without taking that into account.
まあ極端に言えばもうゲームはプレイヤーの視線でずっと見ながら
To
作
put
った
it
方が
more
いい。
simply, when we're creating a game, we have to force ourselves
でその方が
to make the software purely from the viewpoint of the game player.
与えたい正確なイメージがプレイ
In
ヤーに伝わる
fact,
と思うんです。
I think this is the way that your vision will be most clearly conveyed to the players who play your games.
だから納期が伸びてもしょうがないので私は
So that's why I feel, if I feel so strongly, I feel this so strongly that if I think we need to drastically change the spec or even delay a game, I'm willing to take that risk and upend the tea table.
でこのビルでやってる人はみんな僕が近づいてくるのが
So
嫌みたいですよ。
everybody who works in this building here, which is our headquarters, when they hear my footsteps approaching towards the end of a project, they get very nervous.
まあ本当かどうかは今日は青沼さん
Well, that's what they say. I don't know if it's true.
レクチャーをするので
You'll have to go visit Mr. Aonuma this afternoon at his lecture and see what he has to say about it.
彼は結構喜んでるかもわかる。
For all I know, he may enjoy hearing my footsteps.
はい。まあとにかくその幸せそうなプレイヤーの顔というのは
So in any case, I believe that my vision of a happy player's face,
プロジェクトで
the one that I try to imagine in every project,
任天堂の
is also a good match for Nintendo.
で今プレイしていない人までもゲーム実
And I should say that I believe that these positive emotions are also effective in successfully expanding the audience of gamers to people who don't currently play. Because when they say someone in the household is experiencing joy
誰かが遊んでるのを見
is
たら
having fun
たいと思いますよね。
and enjoying themselves, that's when they think, you know, maybe I want to pick up that controller and try this out myself.
まあこれは日本で初めての Wii を打った時の、
We've been seeing this a lot in Japan since we've released Wii Play.
そしてまあこれアメリカなんですよね。
This is the American version here.
でこのゲームがですね、コアゲーマーにとってはこう
The thing about this game is that
つまんなそうに見える
initially it seems to be too elementary for core gamers.
ゲーマーの人たちが友達
But what we've learned is that many core gamers find themselves enjoying Wii Play, much like they have Wii Sports. And the reason for that is because they've found a new value in this kind of software.
一緒に遊べるんですね。
It's a game that they can play with their non-gaming
だから
friends.
多分ゲーム雑誌のゲーム評価
It's a game that they can use to invite those non-gamers into the world of entertainment, the form of entertainment that they enjoy so much.
のがいるんじゃない
So maybe all you game reviewers out there need to add a new category on which you score games. How fun it is for people who don't play them.
じゃあ、それで僕の開発者としてのビジョンに関してあといくつかの側
So
面
let me now quickly discuss a few more aspects of my personal vision as a developer.
で私がよくしている話に僕の作るゲーム
Now,
の
I
中
often
で
say that
は
I am making games so that players themselves will become more creative.
でこれはつまりプレイヤーが積極的に
More specifically, the fact that the game players are encouraged to proactively think about what they're supposed to do within the game adds particular interest, both for them and for
コ
me.
ミュニケーションという言葉になります
And to expand on this thought a bit further, in my mind, the core of this element is really communication.
まあ今まで一人用の遊びでプレイヤーの間
Now, of course, communication is a key topic, but as you all know, there are many wonderful and very popular games that have nothing to do with communication between players.
ソリティアとかね
Think of someone playing solitaire on a PC,
あるいは業務用のパックマン
or maybe playing Pac-Man in the arcades,
携帯用のテトリスでも
or Tetris on a handheld.
皆さんの作ったゲームもあるかもしれない
Yeah, and I'm sure there are many other games that many of you have made as well.
でそれぞれのゲームの中でそれぞれの人は達成感を得られるんです
And these games are very popular because they provide a personal sense of enjoyment and fulfillment.
これはまあゼルダの伝説っていうのはちょっと違うことを考えて作りました
Some people view Zelda as being part of this group, but when I created it, I had a different idea in mind.
人によってはなんか一人用のシングルプレイヤーアドベンチャーゲームやっていう人もあるんです
Some people think that this single-player game is one where you communicate only with the computer.
僕はそのゼルダの開発の始まりの頃から
But from the start, I thought that Zelda could create a different kind of communication centered around the game itself. And when I first showed an early prototype of the NES version of Zelda, it did not go over well in Japan. People were confused. They didn't know their objective. They didn't know how to move from stage to stage. They couldn't even solve the puzzles. And a lot of people said, look, why don't you just make one way through the dungeon, no multiple paths. But of course I ignored them all. Rather than making it easier for players to understand, I decided to take their sword away from the very beginning. If you do that, then you know what you've got to do. See, I did this because I wanted to challenge them to find that sword. Because I knew that they would think about these problems. They would think before they go to sleep, how am I going to do this? Or maybe as they're riding to work in the morning. And at the same time, I wanted them to talk with other Zelda players and exchange information. Ask each other questions. Find out where to go next. Exchange information. That's what happened. This communication was not a competition, but it was a real-life collaboration that helped make the game more popular. Of course, back then, there were no chat rooms for people to trade ideas in. But still, players found ways to get a hold of each other and exchange information. Sometimes calling them up in the middle of the night, waking them up. And in this sense, Zelda became the inspiration for something very different. Animal Crossing. So this is a game based solely on communication and cooperation, and it's virtually without competition. And, as I said earlier, even my wife agreed to try it because it was designed to be friendly and non-threatening. And it bumped up the wife-ometer once again. So our team was looking for elements which would make the player happy simply by moving their character around the game world. But the interesting thing was that Animal Crossing was also enjoyed by many who were hardcore gamers. So what I learned from this was that what gamers are looking for in games isn't necessarily always the best graphics, or better audio, or better production. And now worldwide, the Animal Crossing games have sold through to 7 million players. And they've invited quite a few new gamers into the forest. And of course, as I said earlier, it also bumped up the wife-ometer. So the next part of game design that I'd like to talk about is prioritization. Now the complaint of every developer on every game ever made, I think, is the same. Not enough. Not enough people. Not enough budget. And not enough time. And of course, the more that we are dedicated to providing the maximum enjoyment for the players, the more that we have this feeling. And of course, it's natural for us to believe that to make people enjoy themselves, we need to add more gorgeous-looking graphics and more content to put into the game. We don't want the player to be disappointed with the decisions that we've made. And so, of course, as a developer, I don't want to disappoint people. So I often go to Mr. Iwata with these same complaints. And unfortunately, he usually responds the same way that I imagine your bosses probably respond. Too bad. But I think what he really means is that I need to use my head a little bit more.
でここで一つのプロジェクトでどんな優先順位をつけたのかをお見せします。
So let me tell you one story about how we applied prioritization for one project, the baseball game within Wii Sports.
で僕子供の頃から野球が大好き
Now, I've been a big baseball fan since I was a child.
リアリズムを追求するなら
So if ever there was a game that I would want to add realism to, it would be baseball.
なのにこのゲームでは野球場は一つしかない。
The thing is the Wii Sports baseball game has only one stadium.
実際の球団や選手のライセン
There's
ス
no licenses for real teams or players.
で送りバントもできないです。
You can't lay a bunt.
野手も操作できない。
You can't steal. You can't even control the fielders.
しかも3イニングしかないんですね。
And the games only last 3 innings.
まるでリアリスティックじゃないです
That's not very realistic at all.
か。でこのキャラクターはもっと非現実的。
And then there's the characters. They're very
日
unrealistic.
本の伝統的なお土産のこけし
They're based on a kind of traditional wooden doll in Japan that are given as souvenirs called
こけし
kokeshi.
と呼んでます。
So we called these characters kokeshi during development.
でこれはいろんな開発者にショックを与えたと思うんですけども、何しろこのキャラクターに
And
は
I think this
とても
approach
足もないん
probably
ですね
shocked a number of developers when we took it. But, I mean, after all, these characters don't even have arms or legs.
で僕らはもっと他の要素でリアリスティックと感じてもらえるようにしようと思ったんですね。
But, and, you know, we had these concerns within Nintendo, but we agreed that our time could be better spent on finding other ways to make the game feel realistic.
やっぱり投げて打つっていうことにエネルギーを全部集中しよう。
So we put all of our efforts into 2 elements, pitching and hitting.
でウィリモコンを使って新しい種類のリアリズムを感
Because
じても
what
らお
we
うと
felt
思
was
って
that with the Wii remote, we could create a new kind of realism that people have never experienced before.
野球の基本を知らない人でも遊べるものになったんですね。
And at the same time, it would allow people who didn't understand the fundamentals of baseball, like bunting or throwing out a runner, to actually play and enjoy the game.
でもちろんこのこけしのスタイルよりはもっとマリオのキャラクターの方がいいんじ
Of
ゃない
course, I should say that at one point during development, we did try using Mario characters as an improvement on the Kokeshi style.
こけしの方がより自分がやってる感じが
But
強
we
い。
found that even without arms or legs, people liked the Kokeshi style better.
それでこういう思い切った決断をしました。
So these are how we came to these decisions.
でこういう決断をしたのでこのプロジェクトは非常にちゃんと時間内に出来上がる。
So it's only by applying this strict prioritization that we were able to complete this project on time.
で誰にでも遊べるベースボールゲーム
And I believe, in my opinion, to deliver a baseball game that can be enjoyed by everyone.
からねこうボタンを押さなくていいんですねって言われるんですよ。
You know, even now, after we've put it out and everybo's played it, many players are showing a great deal of surprise at how easy it is to play, and shocked that they can play it without even pressing a button.
わ私にもできるんですねって言うんですね。
They all say, wow, even I can play this game.
そうです。当然僕は一野球ファンとしてね、
But, of course, being a baseball fan myself,
もっとリアルな野球もできたらいいなと思います。
I'm really hoping I'll get the chance to play a more realistic baseball game at some time on the Wii.
世界中にこの Wii スポーツを遊んでくれる人がたくさんい
But
る。
right now, I'm happy that millions of people around the world
それに非常に満足。
are enjoying Wii Sports right now
次の話。
with a different form of realism.
僕の最後のポイントです。
So now I'd like to go on to the final aspect of my personal vision,
でこの Wii を使ってちょっと説明したと思います。
and that's called
日本の
tenacity.
社内では私が一旦アイデアを思いつくとなかなか諦め
And
な
I'll
い。
continue on with one more example
それは例えば
using the Wii to help explain.
昔
So some people at Nintendo say that when I have an idea, I can never let it go. And I admit this is true. And one example is a toy that Nintendo once manufactured called the Ultra Machine. It allowed you to play baseball in the house. A pitching arm would toss softballs to you, which you could hit with a plastic bat.
すごいビデオゲームにできるんじゃないかなと思ってたんですね。
And I always thought that this would make a fantastic video game.
でこの Wii リモコンがそれを可能にしてくれました。
And the Wii remote has made this possible.
でスタッフが野球の実験をして見せてくれた時にこれはいける。
So when my team came to me with their initial baseball experiment, I thought, yes, finally.
Wii ボースボールではカーブやスクリューボールも投げ分けられます。
But the thing about Wii Baseball that's better is that you can actually choose when you throw a curveball or a
非
screwball.
常に簡単なことです。
But all we've done is something that's very simple.
ただ、こういう技術が来るのを待ってた。
We just waited for the right technology to come along.
そして執念の例をもう一つ。
Here's one more example of tenacity.
これは日本で発売したファミコンのシステム。
This is the disk drive for the Japanese version of the NES.
もう20年前ですね。
This is about 20 years ago
で
that
こ
we
れで
released
人
this.
の顔を作って遊べたらいいなと
And at the
思って
time,
始めたんです
I thought it would be a good idea
ちょっとビデオがあるので見て
to use a game machine to draw your own face, or the faces of others. Let's take a quick look.
これ今目のパーツを選んで
So you can see here, we're picking choosing an eye shape.
こう本当は動かしてるんですけど見えないん
And
ですよ
actually, you're also able to move the eye around. It's kind of hard to see in this video.
口を動かしています
Here they're moving the mouth around.
で顔の輪郭に移って
You can also change the shape of the face.
動かしてはめる
You can move that around and then put it on.
で髪型ですね
You're changing the hairstyle here. It's a little bit easier to understand here.
動かして
You see them move it around
まあこういう
and put it on the face.
でこれをまあシナリオディスクと組み合わせて後でアニメーションしてある
So this was coupled with something called a scenario disc that you would then use to animate these faces. And I thought this was a great idea,
けど僕の意見に賛成する人はあまりありませんでした
but there weren't very many people who
で
agreed
どうやっ
with
て
me.
ゲームにするのっていうんですね
They asked me, how could this be a game?
ほとんどの人がそうですでこれ以上進展なくですねペンディングになります
So at that point, we pretty much stopped making progress on it, and the game was put on the pending list.
なと思いながら
But
置いておきました
I always thought it would be a very fun idea. Still, we left it behind.
でこのアイデアは、休眠状態から覚めます
But then it kind of awoke from hibernation after several years.
任天堂64の90年代ですね64の
In the 1990s, we released the N64 disc system in
これ
Japan.
を製品化した時に、まあ、ついにビデオをお見せしますけど
So next I'll show you a video of how we turned this into an actual product. Something called
で販売したものです
Talent Studio that was sold only to the members of our RANnet network service.
でこのサービスのために山内さんがビデオに出演してくれます
And in fact, Mr. Yamauchi, our former president, cooperated by creating a personal greeting for all the service members who
彼
bought
の挨
this.
拶が見られます
Let's take a quick look. At this time, I would like to thank everybody who has become a member of our RANnet service.
まあこうして服の着替えがねいっぱいできるとか
Now, the key features of this program
だからショートムービー
were
の
the wide variety of clothing options and a built-in movie editor.
まあ前回のこの
Actually, at my last JDC keynote,
ダンスをして見せたのも
I showed a brief movie of me dancing that was based on this
これは
program.
任天堂内でバカ受けだろうと思ったんですけども
And of course, I believed that no one at Nintendo would be able to resist this idea. But somehow they
そ
did.
の後カードリーダーに出会います
But then came the e-reader and the Game Boy Advance
でゲームボーイカメラと組み合わせてゲーム
and the Game Boy camera. And with those together,
これが最後の答えだと思
I
って
thought for sure we had the final answer.
これなら皆さん喜んでくれるだろうと思ったんですね
I thought everybody would love it. They would know I'd created amazing entertainment. Let's take a look. Doesn't this look fun? So at the time we called this stage debut. And I think some of you may have seen this at E3 in 2002. Come on, clap your hands together. I bet you didn't know that Mr. Iwata could dance like that, huh? In fact, I'm pretty sure that's why Mr. Yamauchi made him president. They both got great rhythm. Now, to me, it was obvious that this was going to be a huge hit. But inside Nintendo, the people who reviewed it still said, you know, sure, maybe this is funny, but you still can't make a game out of this. And I couldn't really refute what they had to say. And I thought maybe I should give up, but still, I was not defeated. So when Wii planning began, my team started thinking about how we could use this idea on the Wii. But then one day, Mr. Iwata approached me with a little smirk on his face, and he asked me, "Are we still playing around with that face creation idea?" And I said, "Well, yes, but we haven't been able to turn it into anything significant yet." And at that point, he happily informed me that another team inside the building was working on something similar as part of a DS game, and that they were making good progress. And I said, "This is exactly what I was thinking of." So I went back to my team and I said, "You guys are useless." So I told them I didn't need them anymore, and I went and worked with this other team for a few months. But of course, it's because I do things like this that my team often doesn't appreciate me all that much. But the fact that I'd gotten angry wasn't so much anger with them as it was my own frustration. You know, we've been working on this idea for 20 years, but we'd never been able to turn it into much of anything. You know, of course, you know, at the time, early on, people had evaluated the project negatively. Their view was that, you know, this idea would be very popular with creative people, people who are artists, people who could draw. But that it was too complicated. It would only frustrate the masses who aren't used to using these types of tools and who aren't as creative. And of course, others pointed out that, you know, there was no way to make this into a game. There was no way to make it profitable. You know, players might enjoy the creation process, but everyone questioned how long people would spend on it when there were few ways to show off their creations. But finally, with the Wii, we managed to answer all of these questions. See, because creating these Miis didn't need to be a game in and of themselves. They could be stand-ins for actual players in games. You know, they could be your family members' characters. They could serve many purposes in the games. And of course, because of Wii Connect 24, they could be shared between many players. But for me, the real breakthrough with this idea came when I reminded myself of that first corporate vision that I talked about today, the expanded audience. I realized that I had been seeing things exactly backwards. You see, over the years, by insisting that with every advance in hardware, that we also make the graphics more complex, the detail of the program more complex, the functionality more complex, it turned into less of a game and more of a utility. As we were making it, we ourselves were creating something that the average person would just look at and see as being too complicated. We were actually reducing the number of people who would ever want to use it. But once we started to reconsider the program to be something inviting to the widest possible audience, all the riddles were solved. The editor is simple, the choices are limited, the exchanging of Miis is easy. So my tenacity finally paid off. But it was only when I was willing to take the risk of looking at the problem from a different perspective. So of course, you know, pursuing the latest technology is one way to create something revolutionary. But something really new often is born when a designer has a persistently held idea that they've had for a long time, and they wait long enough for new technology to come and make that dream come alive. And this time around, my vision was transformed into something completely different from all those prototypes that we'd spent so much energy on. And today, people are so taken with the Miis around the world that I'm actually working on a new Wii channel. So with this channel, we're going to allow people to compare the Miis that they've created and hold contests, popularity contests. And you'll be able to do this with people all around the world who are using this one editor to create their Miis. So finally, let me use an old friend of mine to describe one final example of tenacity. Now, as you all know, he came from very humble beginnings, but he's managed to make something of himself in the world. And he's also been in countless games lately, maybe too many. But the one question I'm always asked is, what happened to Mario 128? Now, I first mentioned this theory about 10 years ago in an interview. And then we showed off a technical demo, I think, in 2000 at Space World. Now, the purpose of that demo was to show how new technology of the GameCube could dynamically change the nature of Mario games. So when people ask me what happened to Mario 128, I'm always at a loss as to how to answer. Because actually, most of you have already played it. But you played it in a game called Pikmin. See, this game featured one element of Mario 128 that allowed a large number of characters to operate independently and as a group with some advanced AI. But of course, if I were to tell you all that this is what happened to Mario 128, I think you'd all be pretty angry. So, of course, you'll be experiencing another element of Mario 128 fairly soon. In Super Mario Galaxy, you'll be playing on numerous spherical stages. And this was one of the experiments that we were conducting at the time of Mario 128. And the power of the Wii has finally allowed us to bring this experiment to reality. Please take a look.
It's me, Mario!
Thank you. You'll be able to play Super Mario Galaxy this year. My main message to you today is that creative vision is not simply one element of game design. It is the very essence of game design. But your vision does not have to be my vision. I am only one person. The future of our industry depends on how successful you will be in applying your vision to your video games. After seeing all the independent games nominated at the awards show last night, I don't think I even need to tell you any of this. You've given me a lot of faith about the future of our industry. For me, the measure of success is when one project breaks out past the castle of video gamers and becomes a social phenomenon, like when a hit movie becomes a topic of popular culture. But it is not enough to just please those of us who already love video games. We must reach out to those who don't yet care about our kind of entertainment, and even those who fear it, because there are still a number of them. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could bring them into the world of video games too? With our tools, with our creative vision, and with the courage of our convictions, I know that we can do it. So let's take one last look at how the vision, the image of the stereotypical video gamer was 10 years ago. Already, it's starting to change. We are humans, and our job is to entertain humans. And to do that, we must always remember the human touch. In fact, I believe that Wii Sports is a hint that we can succeed at this. Consider the number of new gamers that Wii Sports has already brought into the gaming fold.
After all, if we can combat my wife, I believe we can combat anyone. Right? Thank you very much.